What if I told you that a police officer, journalists, photographers, neighbors, and paranormal investigators all witnessed events they couldn't explain inside a small house in North London? And what if, nearly 50 years later, nobody can agree on whether it was all a hoax or something far more terrifying? Because unlike most ghost stories, this one wasn't told by a single witness. It involved dozens of people. Some were skeptics. Some were professionals. Some walked into that house fully expecting to expose a prank, yet many left with questions they could never answer. This is the story of the Enfield Poltergeist. And depending on who you ask, it is either one of the greatest paranormal mysteries ever recorded, or one of the most convincing hoaxes in modern history. The story begins in August of 1977 in the London borough of Enfield. At the time, Enfield was a quiet suburban community in North London. It wasn't known for ghost stories or unsolved mysteries. Families lived ordinary lives. Children played in the streets until sunset. Neighbors chatted across garden fences. It was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary was ever expected to happen. And that is exactly why what happened next shocked so many people. On Green Street stood a modest council house numbered 284. There was nothing remarkable about it. No rumors, no local legends, no dark history that anyone knew about. To passers-by, it looked exactly like every other house on the street. But inside that house lived Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children. Life wasn't easy for the family. Peggy was a single mother, working hard to support her children. Like many families, they worried about bills, school, and everyday responsibilities. Their lives were ordinary in every possible way. They weren't interested in ghosts. They weren't looking for attention, and they certainly weren't preparing to become famous. Then one evening, something strange happened. It started with a noise, a simple knocking sound. At first, it seemed completely harmless. The children claimed they could hear knocking coming from inside the walls of their bedroom. Peggy dismissed the complaints almost immediately. Old houses make strange noises all the time. Pipes expand, wood settles, floors creak. There was no reason to assume anything unusual was happening. So she told the children to stop imagining things and go to sleep. But the knocking returned. The next night, and the night after that, each evening it seemed louder than before, more deliberate, more persistent, almost as if someone was trying to get their attention. Soon, the family noticed something unsettling. The knocks seemed to respond. If someone knocked on the wall, a similar knock would come back. If they moved to another room, the sound sometimes followed. The family searched for practical explanations. Perhaps there were pipes behind the walls. Perhaps animals had entered the property. But no matter how carefully they searched, they found nothing. And then the children reported something even stranger. They claimed their beds were moving, not violently, just enough to wake them during the night, enough to make them afraid. Again, Peggy assumed there had to be a logical explanation. Children imagine things, especially when they're frightened, especially when they've been talking about strange noises for days. But then Peggy witnessed something herself. One evening, a heavy chest of drawers reportedly shifted across the room. Not far, not dramatically, but enough to stop her in her tracks. For several seconds, she simply stared at it, trying to understand what she had seen, trying to convince herself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the floor was uneven, maybe someone had bumped it, maybe she hadn't seen it correctly. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And unfortunately for the Hodgson family, things were only beginning. Within days, the activity escalated. Loud bangs echoed through the house after dark. Furniture appeared in places where nobody remembered leaving it. Doors seemed to open by themselves. The children became increasingly frightened. They refused to sleep alone. Even during the daytime, they complained about feeling uncomfortable inside certain rooms. Visitors began noticing it too. Several people later described a strange atmosphere inside the house. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just a feeling that something was wrong. Then came the event that changed everything. Peggy called the police. When the officer arrived, she expected a routine disturbance, perhaps noisy children, perhaps a misunderstanding. Instead, according to later reports, she witnessed a chair move across the floor without anyone touching it. The movement wasn't dramatic enough to prove the existence of ghosts, but it was strange enough to leave an impression. The officer later documented what she had seen, and that single report transformed a family mystery into a national story. Because now it wasn't only the Hodgson family making claims. A police officer had witnessed something unusual too. News spread quickly. Journalists arrived. Photographers gathered outside the house. Curious neighbors came hoping to witness the strange events themselves. Before long, paranormal investigators began taking interest. What had started as a few unexplained knocks inside a bedroom was rapidly becoming one of Britain's most talked about mysteries. Yet nobody realized the most disturbing part of the story was still ahead. Because investigators soon noticed a strange pattern. Many of the unusual incidents seemed connected to one person. 11-year-old Janet Hodgson. Whenever activity occurred, Janet often seemed to be nearby. At first, this immediately raised suspicion. Perhaps she was responsible. Perhaps the entire haunting was an elaborate prank. It wouldn't be the first time a child had fooled adults, but then something happened that made the mystery even harder to explain. Because according to multiple witnesses, strange events continued occurring even when Janet wasn't in the room. Objects reportedly moved. Knocking sounds answered questions. And investigators found themselves unable to explain what they were witnessing. The mystery deepened. Then came the voice. A voice that would make the Enfield Poltergeist famous around the world. By this point, investigators had already spent weeks inside the Hodgson home, documenting the strange activity. They had recorded knocking sounds, interviewed witnesses, and observed countless incidents that seemed impossible to explain. Yet nothing prepared them for what happened next. According to witnesses, 11-year-old Janet Hodgson sometimes began speaking in a voice that sounded nothing like her own. The voice was deep, harsh, raspy, almost as if it belonged to an elderly man. At first, everyone assumed it was a trick, a child imitating a different voice. But the phenomenon continued for hours at a time. The voice claimed to belong to a man named Bill Wilkins. According to the entity, he had once lived in the house years earlier and had died there. Investigators began asking questions. The voice answered. It described rooms inside the house. It spoke about sitting in a favorite chair downstairs. It discussed details that seemed disturbingly specific. The more investigators listened, the more uncomfortable they became. Soon, hours of recordings were collected. Even today, those recordings remain some of the most controversial pieces of evidence connected to the Enfield case. Skeptics insist Janet was simply using vocal tricks. Believers argue that maintaining such a voice for long periods would have been extremely difficult for a young child. The debate continues to this day. But while everyone focused on the voice, the activity inside the house allegedly became even more frightening. Objects reportedly began moving more aggressively. Toys flew across rooms. Furniture shifted unexpectedly. Loud crashes echoed through the house during the middle of the night. Several investigators later described rushing upstairs after hearing violent noises, only to discover overturned furniture and terrified children. Yet they never seemed to catch anyone in the act. Again and again, they arrived moments too late. And every unexplained incident only deepened the mystery. Then came the photographs that would make the Enfield Poltergeist famous around the world. One evening, photographers working for local newspapers were invited into the house. Their goal was simple: capture evidence. They expected to leave with ordinary pictures. Instead, they photographed something that would spark decades of debate. The images appeared to show Janet floating above her bed. In several photographs, she seems suspended in midair. Her body is twisted in strange positions. Her expression appears unnatural. To believers, the photographs looked like evidence of levitation. To skeptics, they looked like a child jumping from a mattress. The images spread rapidly. Newspapers published them across Britain. Soon, people around the world were discussing the Enfield Poltergeist. What had started as strange knocking sounds in a small London house had become an international phenomenon. As attention increased, so did the pressure on the Hodgson family. Journalists crowded outside the property. Television crews arrived, hoping to document new activity. Curious visitors gathered near the house, hoping to witness something supernatural. The family suddenly found themselves living under constant scrutiny, and according to investigators, the disturbances showed no signs of stopping. Several researchers began spending entire nights inside the house. They wanted to experience the events firsthand. Many later reported hearing footsteps moving through empty rooms. Others claimed doors opened by themselves. A few described objects moving without anyone touching them. Perhaps the strangest reports involved the atmosphere itself. Visitors frequently described an overwhelming sense of dread. Some claimed they felt watched. Others said certain rooms made them feel uncomfortable for reasons they couldn't explain. Even hardened journalists admitted the house felt unsettling after dark. But as the case became more famous, cracks began appearing in the story. Investigators occasionally caught Janet behaving suspiciously. Some witnesses reported seeing her bend spoons. Others claimed they observed her manipulating objects. For skeptics, this was exactly the evidence they had been waiting for. If Janet had faked some incidents, perhaps she had faked everything. Newspapers began publishing articles questioning the authenticity of the haunting. Psychologists suggested that stress, imagination, and the desire for attention could explain much of the activity. The debate became increasingly heated. Was the Enfield Poltergeist real, or had the world been fooled by a clever child? Interestingly, even some investigators who believed in the haunting admitted that not every incident appeared genuine. They acknowledged that Janet sometimes exaggerated events, but they also insisted that other incidents remained unexplained. According to them, they had personally witnessed occurrences that could not easily be dismissed as tricks. And that is what makes the Enfield case so fascinating. Unlike many ghost stories, there is no clear answer. There is evidence supporting both sides. There are witnesses who remain convinced something paranormal occurred inside that house. And there are critics who believe every event can be explained through ordinary means. As months passed, the disturbances gradually became less frequent. The knocking sounds faded. The strange voice appeared less often. The violent activity slowed. And eventually, life inside the Hodgson home began returning to normal. By the end of the decade, the haunting seemed to be over. The reporters left. The investigators completed their reports. The crowds disappeared. But the mystery remained. Nearly 50 years later, the Enfield Poltergeist continues to be debated by paranormal researchers around the world. Audio recordings still exist. Photographs still exist. Witness statements still exist. And every piece of evidence seems to raise as many questions as it answers. Some believe the Enfield Poltergeist represents one of the strongest paranormal cases ever documented. Others consider it one of the most successful hoaxes in modern history. The truth may never be known. The house still stands today. New families have lived there over the years. Most report nothing unusual. Yet the story refuses to die, because somewhere between the photographs, the recordings, the witness testimonies, and the countless unanswered questions lies a mystery that has never truly been solved. And perhaps that is what makes the Enfield Poltergeist so terrifying. Not the possibility that ghosts are real, but the possibility that after all these years, nobody can say for certain what really happened inside that house.